The gunshot that shattered the morning silence sent 23-year-old Rebecca Hartford diving behind the water trough, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. And in that split second of terror, she realized the peaceful life she had built in Silver Creek, Montana territory was about to crumble like dried earth beneath a stampede. It was June of 1883, and the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Tobacco Root Mountains had been her sanctuary for the past 8 months. Rebecca had come west from Philadelphia after her father's death, using the modest inheritance he left to purchase a small dress shop on Main Street. The townsfolk had welcomed her cautiously at first, as they did all newcomers, but her skill with a needle and her fair prices had won them over. She had friends now, a place in the community, and for the first time since losing her father, she felt like she belonged somewhere. But belonging meant nothing when bullets started flying. The second shot rang out, splintering the wooden post beside her head. Rebecca pressed herself lower, her cotton dress soaking up muddy water from the street. Through the gap beneath the trough, she could see boots, at least 3 pairs, moving with deadly purpose toward the bank across the street. The robbery was happening in broad daylight, bold and brazen, and she was caught in the crossfire. "Stay down!" a male voice shouted from somewhere to her left. Rebecca turned her head, water dripping into her eyes, and saw Tom Bradley, the blacksmith's apprentice, crouched behind a barrel. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he gestured frantically for her to remain still. More shots exploded from inside the bank. Glass shattered. A woman screamed. Rebecca recognized Mrs. Patterson's voice and felt her stomach twist with fear. The elderly woman worked as a teller and had been kind to Rebecca when she first arrived, bringing her fresh bread and advice on dealing with the harsh Montana winters. The bank's door burst open, and 3 men emerged, their faces covered with bandanas, their arms laden with canvas bags that clinked with the sound of coin and rattled with the weight of gold dust. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes visible above his mask, fired twice more into the air, sending pedestrians scattering like frightened chickens. "Anyone follows, we start killing," he shouted, his voice rough as gravel. They mounted horses that had been waiting at the hitching post, and within seconds they were galloping out of town, heading north toward the mountains. The sound of hoofbeats faded, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by Mrs. Patterson's sobbing from inside the bank. Rebecca pulled herself up on shaking legs, her dress ruined, her hands trembling. Tom rushed over to help steady her. "Are you hurt, Miss Hartford?" he asked, his young face creased with concern. "No, I'm fine," she managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "We need to check on Mrs. Patterson." They hurried across the street along with several other townspeople who emerged from their hiding places. Inside the bank, they found Mrs. Patterson sitting on the floor, unhurt but badly frightened. The bank manager, Mr. Thornton, stood by the open vault, his face ashen. "They took everything," he said, his voice hollow. "Nearly $15,000. The payroll for the mining company, personal savings, everything." A murmur of dismay rippled through the growing crowd. $15,000 was a fortune, representing months of hard work for the miners and the financial security of dozens of families. "Someone needs to ride to Fort Ellis," Tom said. "Get the cavalry." "That's 3 days there and back, mister," Thornton replied, shaking his head. "Those men will be long gone by then." "What about Sheriff Dawson?" someone asked. "The sheriff rode to Bozeman yesterday for a trial," another voice answered. "Won't be back for a week." Rebecca felt a surge of frustration. The men who had terrorized their town, who had stolen their hard-earned money, would escape because there was no one to stop them. It seemed impossibly unfair. "There's Colt Morgan," Mrs. Patterson said quietly from her spot on the floor. The name sent a ripple through the crowd, and Rebecca saw several people exchange glances. She had heard the name before, whispered in the general store, and mentioned in hushed conversations at the boarding house where she took her meals. Colt Morgan was a cowboy who lived alone on a ranch about 10 miles outside of town, a man with a reputation that preceded him like thunder before a storm. "Morgan doesn't involve himself in town business," Mr. Thornton said dismissively. "He was a cavalry scout," Mrs. Patterson insisted, struggling to her feet with Rebecca's help. "Fought in the Apache campaigns down in Arizona Territory. They say he's the best tracker in Montana. If anyone can catch those men, it's him." "Even if that's true, why would he help us?" Tom asked. "Because it's the right thing to do," Rebecca heard herself say. All eyes turned to her, and she felt her cheeks warm. Surely even a recluse understands justice. Mr. Thornton sighed heavily. Someone would have to ride out to his place and ask, and even then, there's no guarantee he'd agree. I'll go, Rebecca said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Miss Hartford, I don't think that's wise, Tom protested. You don't know the man. He's not exactly friendly to strangers. Then someone should come with me, Rebecca said firmly. She was not normally an impulsive person, but something about the robbery, about the violation of their peaceful town, had ignited a spark of determination in her chest. We can't just let those thieves get away. That money represents people's livelihoods. Tom looked uncomfortable, but after a moment he nodded. I'll go with you. My horse is at the livery. Take mine, Mr. Thornton offered. It's faster. And Miss Hartford, if you can convince Colt Morgan to help, tell him the town will pay him $1,000 from the recovery. An hour later, Rebecca found herself riding north out of Silver Creek on a borrowed mare, Tom beside her on his steady gelding. She had changed into her riding clothes, a practical split skirt and sturdy blouse, and packed a small bag with water and provisions, though she hoped they would be back before nightfall. The journey to Morgan's ranch took them through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The June sun was warm but not oppressive, and the breeze carried the scent of sage and pine. Under different circumstances, Rebecca might have enjoyed the ride. She had always loved the wild beauty of Montana, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. What do you know about this Colt Morgan? She asked Tom as they followed a well-worn trail. Tom was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Not much, to be honest. He keeps to himself mostly. Comes into town maybe once a month for supplies, pays cash, doesn't talk much, and leaves. I've heard stories, though. What kind of stories? That he was one of the best scouts the cavalry ever had. That he could track a single horse through a thunderstorm, read signs that other men couldn't even see. But something happened down in Arizona during the Apache Wars. No one knows exactly what, but when his enlistment ended, he came up here and bought that ranch. Been alone ever since. How long ago? 3, maybe 4 years. Rebecca pondered this as they rode. A man running from something, hiding in the wilderness. It did not sound promising for their errand. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was modest but well-maintained, a wooden house with a stone chimney, a sturdy barn, and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, their red hides bright against the green grass. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. As they approached, Rebecca noticed a man working near the barn. Even from a distance, she could tell he was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements efficient and purposeful, as he repaired a section of fence. He looked up as they drew near, and Rebecca felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Colt Morgan was perhaps 28 or 29 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes, she noticed as they dismounted, were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He wore simple work clothes, denim pants, and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. He did not smile as they approached, and his expression was guarded, almost wary. "Help you folks?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. Rebecca stepped forward, determined not to be intimidated. "Mr. Morgan, my name is Rebecca Hartford, and this is Tom Bradley. We've come from Silver Creek." "I know where you've come from," he said, setting down his hammer. "That doesn't explain why you're here." "The bank was robbed this morning," Tom said. 3 men took $15,000 and rode north. The sheriff is out of town, and there's no one to pursue them. We were hoping you might help." Morgan's expression did not change. "You were hoping wrong. I don't get involved in town matters." He turned back to his fence, dismissing them as clearly as if he had told them to leave. Rebecca felt a surge of frustration. "Mr. Morgan, that money belongs to hard-working people," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Miners who risk their lives underground, families trying to build a future. Without it, some of them won't make it through the winter." "That's unfortunate," Morgan said, without turning around. "But it's not my problem." "How can you say that?" Rebecca demanded, stepping closer. "You live in this territory, benefit from its protection and resources. Don't you feel any responsibility to your neighbors?" Morgan turned then, and the look in his gray eyes made her breath catch. There was pain there, deep and old, mixed with something harder. "My neighbors, as you call them, want nothing to do with me except when they need something," he said quietly. "I came here for peace and solitude, Miss Hartford. I suggest you respect that. Even if it means innocent people suffer, even then. The words were final, absolute. Tom touched Rebecca's arm gently. Come on, Miss Hartford, we tried. But Rebecca could not let it go. Something in Morgan's eyes, that flash of pain, told her there was more to his refusal than simple selfishness. What happened to you? She asked softly. What made you stop caring? For a moment, Morgan's carefully constructed wall seemed to crack. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice rough. Then tell me, Rebecca challenged. Tell me why a man with your skills, your experience, would hide out here while others suffer. Make me understand. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they would leave. But Rebecca held Morgan's gaze, refusing to look away. I led men to their deaths, Morgan said finally, the words seeming to be torn from somewhere deep inside him. Good men, soldiers who trusted me. I made a mistake, read the signs wrong, and led them straight into an ambush. 12 men died because of my error. So no, Miss Hartford, I will not use those same flawed skills to help your town. I will not be responsible for more lives. The raw pain in his voice struck Rebecca like a physical blow. She understood now, understood the weight he carried. I'm sorry, she said genuinely. That must have been terrible. But, Mr. Morgan, everyone makes mistakes, and from what I've heard, you saved far more lives than you lost. Those 12 men, their deaths were tragic. But what about all the others you helped? Don't they count? It doesn't work that way, Morgan said, turning away again. Maybe it should, Rebecca replied. Maybe you've punished yourself enough. She did not expect her words to change his mind. She could see he was a man who had built walls around himself, walls constructed from guilt and grief. But she had needed to try. We should go, Tom said again, more insistently this time. Rebecca nodded reluctantly. They were mounting their horses when Morgan spoke again. These men who robbed the bank, did anyone get a good look at them? Rebecca turned in her saddle, hope flaring in her chest. The leader was tall, over 6 feet. Cold eyes, blue or maybe gray. He wore a ring on his right hand, silver with a red stone. I saw it when he fired his gun. Morgan was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation. Give me an hour to pack supplies and saddle my horse, he said. I'll track them, but I work alone. You two go back to town and tell them I'll return the money if I can find it. Thank you, Rebecca said, relief flooding through her. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Morgan said grimly. Those men have a good head start, and if they're who I think they are, this won't be easy. Rebecca wanted to ask what he meant, but Morgan had already strode toward the house, his long legs eating up the distance. She exchanged a glance with Tom. We did it, Tom said, grinning. You convinced him. I hope I did the right thing, Rebecca replied, watching Morgan's retreating back. Something told her she had just set events in motion that would change more than she could imagine. They rode back to Silver Creek with the good news, and the town erupted in relieved chatter. Mr. Thornton seemed particularly pleased, already counting the recovered money in his mind. Rebecca went to her shop and tried to focus on the dress she was sewing for Mrs. Patterson, but her thoughts kept drifting to Colt Morgan and the shadows in his gray eyes. 3 days passed with no word. Rebecca found herself watching the northern trail, looking for signs of a returning rider. The town continued its daily routines, but everyone was waiting, wondering if the mysterious cowboy would succeed where others would have failed. On the afternoon of the 4th day, the sky began to darken. Thick clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them the smell of rain and the promise of a storm. By evening, the first drops were falling, fat and heavy, drumming on the roof of Rebecca's shop. She was closing up for the night, pulling the curtains across the front window when she saw Tom running down the street, heedless of the rain. Miss Hartford, he called, bursting through her door. You need to come quick. Mrs. Jenkins just rode in from her homestead. She says there's a rider coming, leading a horse with someone draped over the saddle. Rebecca's heart leaped into her throat. Is it Morgan? She thinks so, but she says whoever is on that other horse looks to be in bad shape. Rebecca grabbed her shawl and followed Tom into the rain, which had intensified into a full downpour. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the street in the harsh white flashes. By the time they reached the edge of town, Rebecca was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a figure on horseback, moving slowly but steadily toward them. As he drew closer, Rebecca recognized Colt Morgan's tall form, though he looked exhausted, slumped in his saddle. Behind him, another horse followed on a lead rope, and draped across its saddle was a body. No, not a body, Rebecca realized with a start. The figure moved slightly, lifting a head that was clearly female. The small crowd that had gathered murmured in confusion. They had expected Morgan to return with the stolen money, and perhaps a captured thief or two. No one had expected him to bring back a woman. Morgan reined in his horse, and Rebecca could see the exhaustion carved into his face. He had a cut above his left eye, partially hidden by his wet hair, and his shirt was torn in several places. But his eyes were alert as they scanned the crowd. "She needs a doctor," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now." "Dr. Miller is at the boarding house," someone called out. "I'll get him," Tom volunteered, sprinting away through the rain. Morgan dismounted, his movements stiff, and moved to the second horse. With surprising gentleness, he lifted the woman down, cradling her against his chest. She was young, Rebecca saw, perhaps her own age, with long dark hair and pale skin. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and she seemed barely conscious. "Bring her to my shop," Rebecca heard herself say. "It's closest and I have a stove. We can get her warm and dry." Morgan nodded and followed Rebecca back to her shop. She held the door open as he carried the woman inside, water streaming from both of them onto her clean floor. Rebecca did not care. She quickly lit more lamps and stoked the stove, building up the fire until warmth began to fill the room. "Put her here," Rebecca said, gesturing to the settee she kept for customers. She grabbed several bolts of fabric, spreading them over the furniture to protect both it and the woman. Morgan laid her down carefully, and Rebecca got her first good look at the stranger. She was beautiful, despite her current state, with high cheekbones and full lips. But it was the bruises on her face and arms that made Rebecca gasp. "Who is she?" Rebecca asked, grabbing towels from her supply cabinet. "Her name is Sarah," Morgan said, stepping back to give Rebecca room to work. "Sarah Mitchell. She was with the men who robbed your bank." Rebecca's hands stilled. "She's one of the thieves?" "No," Morgan said firmly. "She's their prisoner, or she was. The men who robbed your bank are the Culver gang. 3 brothers, vicious and cruel. They've been robbing banks and stagecoaches from Wyoming to Dakota Territory for the past 2 years. Sarah's father owned a ranch near Billings. The Culvers murdered him 6 months ago and took Sarah. They've been keeping her with them ever since, using her as a cook and worse." The anger in Morgan's voice made Rebecca look up. His gray eyes were hard as flint, his jaw clenched. "How did you find her?" Rebecca asked, gently wiping Sarah's face with a damp towel. "I tracked the Culvers north into the mountains. Caught up with them yesterday at an abandoned trapper's cabin. There was a fight. I managed to get Sarah away and recover most of the money, but the brothers escaped." "Are they coming after you?" Morgan's expression darkened. "Probably. Luke Culver, the leader, won't take kindly to losing his prisoner or his loot." The door burst open and Tom rushed in, followed by Dr. Miller, a portly man in his 50s carrying his medical bag. The doctor hurried to Sarah's side, his experienced hands checking her pulse and examining her injuries. "She's been through hell," Dr. Miller said after a moment, his voice tight with anger. "Dehydration, malnutrition, multiple contusions and lacerations. Some of these bruises are weeks old. Where did you find her, Colt?" Morgan explained again, his voice flat, reciting facts as if emotion would make the story unbearable. Rebecca noticed how his hands clenched at his sides as he spoke, how his jaw tightened when he mentioned what the Culvers had done. "She'll need constant care for the next few days," Dr. Miller said. "Rest, warm food, and gentle treatment. I can give her something for the pain, but time and kindness are what she needs most." "She can stay with me," Rebecca said immediately. "I have a room behind the shop. It's small but comfortable. I can look after her." "Miss Hartford, are you sure?" Tom asked. "If those men come looking for her, then we'll deal with it," Rebecca said firmly. "This woman has suffered enough. She deserves safety and care." Dr. Miller nodded approvingly and began preparing a draft from his bag. Morgan was quiet, watching Rebecca with an expression she could not quite read. "The money," Morgan said after a moment. "It's in the saddlebags on my horse. $14,200. I couldn't find the rest. The Culvers must have hidden it or spent it already." You got back almost all of it, Tom said, clearly impressed. That's incredible. I'll take the bags to Mr. Thornton, another townsperson offered, heading back out into the rain. Dr. Miller got Sarah to drink his medicine, and within minutes, the young woman's breathing deepened into sleep. The doctor gave Rebecca detailed instructions on her care and promised to return in the morning. As the others filed out, eager to share the news of Morgan's success and the recovery of the money, Rebecca found herself alone with the cowboy. He stood by the door, dripping water onto her floor, looking uncomfortable and out of place among her fabrics and sewing supplies. "Thank you," Rebecca said softly, "for saving her, for bringing back the money." "I told you not to thank me," Morgan replied, but there was less bite in his voice than before. "Why did you do it?" Rebecca asked. "You said you wouldn't get involved." Morgan was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on Sarah's sleeping form. "Because you were right," he said finally. "I've punished myself enough. And because when I found her, chained in that cabin like an animal, I remembered why I became a scout in the first place, to help people who couldn't help themselves." His words touched something deep in Rebecca's chest. She took a step toward him. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "Back to my ranch. Those Culvers are still out there, and they know who I am now. I need to be ready if they come looking for revenge." "Or you could stay in town," Rebecca suggested. "At least for tonight. The storm is getting worse and you're exhausted. The boarding house has rooms." Morgan shook his head. "I don't belong here, Miss Hartford. I did what you asked. Now I'm going home." He turned to leave, but Rebecca reached out, her hand catching his arm. Through the wet fabric of his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath, could feel the warmth of his skin despite the rain's chill. "Mr. Morgan," she said, then amended. "Colt, you belong wherever you choose to be. Don't let the past dictate your future." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been hope or longing. But then he pulled away, gently but firmly. "Take care of Sarah," he said. "She's been through more than anyone should have to endure." Then he was gone, disappearing into the storm-darkened street. Rebecca watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure quickly swallowed by the rain and darkness. She turned back to Sarah, checking to make sure the young woman was resting comfortably, then set about cleaning up the water and mud that had been tracked across her floor. As she worked, she found her thoughts constantly drifting to Colt Morgan, to the pain in his eyes and the strength in his hands, to the way he had carried Sarah so gently, despite his own exhaustion. She barely knew the man, had only met him twice, and yet she could not stop thinking about him. It was foolish, she told herself. He had made it clear he wanted solitude, wanted to live apart from others. There could be no future in caring for a man like that. And yet, as the storm raged outside and Sarah slept peacefully on the settee, Rebecca knew that something had changed. The cowboy who rode through the storm had brought back more than stolen money and a rescued woman. He had brought something else into Rebecca's life, something she had not experienced since her father's death. Hope. The next several days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah woke the following morning, weak but conscious, and Rebecca helped her to the small bedroom behind the shop. The young woman was terrified at first, flinching at every sound and movement, but Rebecca's gentle care gradually helped her relax. As Sarah grew stronger, she began to talk, sharing pieces of her story. Her father, William Mitchell, had owned a prosperous ranch outside Billings. The Culver brothers had shown up one day, demanding supplies and money. When William refused, Luke Culver shot him dead in front of Sarah. They burned the ranch house and took Sarah with them, planning to ransom her. But they soon discovered that William Mitchell had been Sarah's only family, and there was no one to pay for her return. Rather than release her, they kept her, forcing her to cook and care for their camps, while they continued their criminal activities. The bruises on her body told of the abuse she had suffered, though Sarah did not speak of those details, and Rebecca did not press her. "I thought I would die with them," Sarah said one evening as Rebecca brushed her long hair, helping her prepare for bed. "I prayed for it sometimes, for God to take me and end the nightmare. But then Colt found me." "He's a good man," Rebecca said softly. "He's more than that," Sarah replied, her eyes distant. "He fought all three of them at once to get me out of that cabin. Luke shot him, and he kept fighting. I've never seen anyone so strong or so determined." She paused, then added, "He talked about you, you know. while we were riding back. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. What did he say? That you had challenged him, made him question the choices he had made. He said you had courage. Sarah smiled slightly. I think he was impressed by you. Rebecca tried to ignore the warmth that spread through her chest at those words. It did not matter what Colt thought of her. He had made his choice, to return to his isolated ranch and his solitary life. But she could not stop wondering about him, could not stop worrying. Was his wound healing properly? Were the Culvers searching for him? Was he alone out there, or had he found some measure of peace? A week after the robbery, Mr. Thornton threw a celebration at the Silver Creek Hotel to honor the recovery of the money. The entire town attended, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to eat and drink and forget, for one evening, the hardships of frontier life. Rebecca wore her best dress, a deep blue silk she had made herself, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Sarah was still too weak to attend, but she insisted Rebecca go and enjoy herself. The hotel's main room was decorated with lanterns and flowers, and a small band played cheerful music in the corner. Mr. Thornton gave a speech thanking everyone involved, and there was much speculation about where Colt Morgan was and why he had not come to claim his reward. Probably spending it all on whiskey out at that ranch of his, one man said, laughing. Rebecca bristled at the comment. Mr. Morgan risked his life to help this town, she said sharply. Perhaps he simply values his privacy. The man looked chagrined, and several others nodded in agreement. Rebecca excused herself and stepped outside, needing fresh air and space from the crowded room. The June night was beautiful, the sky clear and filled with stars. A full moon hung low on the horizon, painting everything in silver light. Rebecca walked to the edge of the hotel's porch, breathing in the scent of sage and wildflowers. Beautiful night, a familiar voice said from the shadows. Rebecca spun around, her heart leaping. Colt Morgan stepped into the moonlight, and she caught her breath. He had cleaned up, his hair freshly cut, his jaw clean-shaven. He wore dark pants, a white shirt, and a leather vest, looking more like a gentleman than a hardened cowboy. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those stormy gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful defenses. You came, she said, hating how breathless she sounded. I was invited, Colt replied with a slight smile. Besides, I wanted to check on Sarah. How is she? Getting stronger every day. She's remarkable, really. After everything she's been through, she still manages to smile, to find joy in small things. Colt nodded, looking relieved. She deserves happiness. She deserves a chance at a normal life. So do you, Rebecca said softly. Colt's smile faded. Rebecca, don't, she interrupted. Don't tell me you're too damaged or too dangerous to be cared about. I've watched you, Colt Morgan. I've seen how gentle you were with Sarah, how you risked everything to save her. Whatever mistakes you made in the past, you've more than paid for them. You don't understand, Colt said, his voice rough. Those 12 men who died, one of them was my brother, my younger brother, Thomas. He followed me into the cavalry because he admired me, believed I could keep him safe, and I got him killed. The pain in his voice made Rebecca's eyes sting with tears. She moved closer until she was standing just inches from him. I'm so sorry, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. But Colt, punishing yourself forever won't bring him back. It won't change what happened. All it does is waste the life you still have, the life your brother would want you to live. Colt looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw the war being waged inside him, the battle between grief and hope, between the past and the possibility of a future. When I saw you that first day, he said quietly, standing in my yard, demanding I help, I was angry. I had my walls built so high, and you just marched right up and started tearing them down. And then, when I was riding back through that storm with Sarah, cold and hurting and wondering if I'd made a mistake coming back to this life, I kept thinking about you, about your courage and your conviction, about the way you looked at me, like you could see something in me worth saving. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Because there is, she whispered. Colt, there is so much worth saving. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her cheek with his hand. His palm was rough and warm, his touch achingly gentle. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to be anything other than alone. Then let me teach you, Rebecca replied, covering his hand with hers. Let me show you that you don't have to carry everything by yourself. For a long moment, they stood frozen, the noise from the celebration inside fading to nothing, the world narrowing to just the two of them in the moonlight. Then Colt bent his head, slowly, carefully, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Rebecca sighed against his mouth and leaned into him, he deepened the kiss, his arms coming around her waist to pull her closer. She melted against him, her hands sliding up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise this will be easy," he said. "I've got a lot of darkness in me, a lot of ghosts." "I'm not afraid of ghosts," Rebecca replied, "and I'm not afraid of hard work. Colt, I care about you, more than I probably should after knowing you such a short time. But I can't help it. When you rode through that storm to bring Sarah home, when you carried her in and made sure she was safe despite your own injuries, I saw the real you. Not the man hiding on that ranch, but the man you truly are, and that's the man I want to know." Colt closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "You humble me, Rebecca Hartford," he said. "You make me want to be better, to be the man you seem to think I am." "You already are," she assured him. "You just need to believe it." They stood together on that porch for a long time, holding each other under the stars, neither wanting to break the spell. Inside, the celebration continued, but out here, in the quiet night, something else was being celebrated, the birth of something new, fragile and precious and full of promise. Eventually, they went inside together, and the townsfolk greeted Colt with cheers and handshakes. Mr. Thornton presented him with the promised $1,000 reward, along with the town's gratitude. Colt accepted graciously, though Rebecca could tell he was uncomfortable with the attention. They danced together that night, and Rebecca felt like she was floating. Colt was stiff at first, clearly unpracticed in the social graces. But he learned quickly, and soon they were moving together with an easy rhythm that felt natural and right. "I should warn you," Colt said as they swayed to a slow waltz. "The Culver brothers are still out there. I hurt their pride and took their money. They'll want revenge." "Then we'll be careful," Rebecca replied. "But Colt, you can't live your whole life in fear of what might happen." "It's not my life I'm worried about," he said, his arms tightening around her. "It's yours, and Sarah's. By involving myself in this town, by caring about people here, I've made you all targets." "We were already targets the moment those men rode into Silver Creek," Rebecca pointed out. "At least now we have you to protect us." "And Colt, isn't that better than facing danger alone?" He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been alone long enough." The celebration wound down in the early hours of the morning. Colt walked Rebecca back to her shop, moving slowly through the quiet streets. At her door, he kissed her again, this time with more confidence, and Rebecca felt heat bloom through her entire body. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'd like that," Rebecca replied, smiling. "Come for breakfast. I'll introduce you properly to Sarah." He nodded and waited until she was safely inside before turning and walking away. Rebecca leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips where his kiss still burned. She felt like a girl again, giddy and excited and terrified all at once. In the back room, she found Sarah sitting up in bed, a knowing smile on her face. "You kissed him," Sarah said, not a question but a statement. Rebecca felt her cheeks heat. "I did. Is that foolish?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "It's wonderful. Colt deserves happiness, and so do you. I saw the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. That man is smitten, Rebecca." "It's so fast," Rebecca said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I barely know him." "Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up," Sarah replied wisely. "My parents met and married within a month. They had 25 happy years together before my father died. When it's right, it's right. Time doesn't matter." Rebecca hoped Sarah was correct, because despite her words about not being foolish, her heart was already invested in Colt Morgan. She was falling for the brooding cowboy with the tragic past and the gentle hands, and there was no stopping it now. The following weeks were among the happiest of Rebecca's life. Colt began spending more time in town, ostensibly to help keep watch for the Culver brothers, but really because he wanted to be near Rebecca. They spent every moment they could together, walking through the hills around Silver Creek, having picnics by the river, talking late into the night on the porch of her shop. Rebecca learned about Colt's childhood in Kansas, how he and his younger brother Thomas had been inseparable, how they had both joined the cavalry together to seek adventure and purpose. She learned about the Apache campaigns, the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, and the skills Colt had developed as a scout. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, her mother's death when she was young, her close relationship with her father, who had raised her alone. She told him about the loneliness she felt after her father's passing, how she had needed to escape the city and its memories, how she had chosen Silver Creek almost at random from a map, drawn by the promise of mountains and open sky. "Do you regret it?" Colt asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. "Coming west?" "Not for a moment," Rebecca replied honestly. "This place gave me a new beginning, and it gave me you." Colt smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face and made Rebecca's heart flutter. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never been before. Sarah, meanwhile, was blossoming under Rebecca's care. The bruises faded, her strength returned, and slowly, her spirit healed. She began helping in the shop, discovering she had a talent for embroidery and design. The two women became close friends, sisters in all but blood. But the shadow of the Culver brothers hung over them all. Colt never fully relaxed, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from the gun he now wore on his hip. He taught Rebecca and Sarah how to shoot, taking them out to his ranch for lessons, insisting they needed to be able to defend themselves. Rebecca proved to be a surprisingly good shot, her hands steady and her aim true. Sarah was less accurate but made up for it with determination. Colt watched them both with a mixture of pride and sadness, clearly hating that such skills were necessary. "I wish I could give you a world where you didn't need to know how to kill," he said one evening after their practice session. "But this is the world we have," Rebecca replied, checking the chambers of her revolver, as he had taught her. "And I'd rather be prepared than helpless." July arrived, bringing with it the full heat of Montana summer. The days were long and golden, the nights warm and full of stars. Colt's ranch was thriving, his cattle healthy, and his hayfields lush. He hired a couple of hands to help with the work, young men from town who were reliable and hard-working. One afternoon, as Rebecca was closing up the shop, Colt arrived with his horse saddled and a determined look on his face. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." Intrigued, Rebecca locked the door and let Colt help her onto his horse. She sat in front of him, his arms around her as he held the reins, and they rode out of town at an easy pace. The position was intimate, her back pressed against his chest, his breath warm against her neck. They rode for about an hour, following trails Rebecca had never seen before, climbing higher into the foothills. Finally, they emerged into a meadow that took Rebecca's breath away. It was carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable: purple lupine, yellow arrowleaf balsam root, red Indian paintbrush, white yarrow. The colors waved in the breeze like a living quilt, and the air was thick with the hum of bees and the sweet scent of blossoms. Beyond the meadow, the tobacco root mountains rose in majesty, their peaks still tipped with snow despite the summer heat. The view was spectacular, endless sky and mountain and meadow stretching as far as the eye could see. "Colt, this is beautiful," Rebecca breathed. He dismounted and helped her down, then took her hand and led her into the center of the meadow. They stood together, surrounded by flowers and beauty, and Colt turned to face her. "I found this place not long after I came to Montana," he said. "It was after Thomas died, after I left the cavalry. I was broken, Rebecca, completely lost. I rode for days, not caring where I went or if I ever stopped. And then I found this meadow. It was spring then, and the flowers were just starting to bloom. I stood here, in all this beauty, and for the first time since the ambush, I felt something other than pain. I felt hope. Just a tiny spark, but it was enough to keep me going." Rebecca squeezed his hand, tears pricking her eyes. "I bought the ranch because it was close to this place," Colt continued. "I came here whenever the darkness got too heavy, whenever I thought I couldn't carry the weight anymore. This meadow saved my life, in a way, and now I want to share it with you." "Why?" Rebecca asked, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. Colt took both her hands in his his gray eyes intense and filled with emotion. "Because I love you, Rebecca Hartford," he said, the words clear and strong. "I love your courage and your kindness, your stubborn refusal to let me hide from life. I love the way you care for Sarah, the way you've welcomed me into your heart despite all my baggage. I love you, and I want to spend my life showing you how much." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, had dreamed, but hearing the words still sent shockwaves through her entire being. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Colt, I've loved you since you rode through that storm, since you carried Sarah into my shop, and I saw the real you beneath all that armor. I love you so much." Colt pulled her close and kissed her, and this kiss was different from all the others. It was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that they belonged to each other now and forever. Rebecca wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and passion she felt, not caring that they were standing in the middle of a meadow under the open sky. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small object. He held it out to Rebecca, and she gasped. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond set in a delicate filigree. The setting was old-fashioned, clearly an antique. "This was my mother's ring," Colt said softly. "The only thing I have from her. She died when I was 12, but I remember her telling me to give this to the woman I loved when I found her. Rebecca, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, build a life with me, help me learn how to be whole again?" Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, tears of joy so pure and bright she thought she might burst from it. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Colt, of course I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he lifted her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, surrounded by flowers and mountains and endless Montana sky. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about their future, making plans. Colt wanted to expand his ranch, maybe start breeding horses. Rebecca wanted to continue her dress shop, perhaps teach other women the trade. They talked about children, agreeing they both wanted a family, though they would wait a year or two, give themselves time to settle into married life. "Sarah should live with us," Rebecca said, "at least until she's ready to be on her own. She has nowhere else to go, Colt, and she's become like a sister to me." "I agree," Colt said. "The ranch house is big enough, and she could help you with your work if she wanted, or find her own path. Whatever makes her happy." Rebecca smiled, loving him even more for his generosity. They rode back to town as the stars came out, and Rebecca felt like she was living in a dream. Everything was perfect, too perfect. She tried to ignore the small voice in the back of her mind that whispered, "Nothing this good lasts forever." They decided to marry in August, giving themselves time to prepare, but not waiting too long. Rebecca wanted a simple ceremony, just close friends and the minister, followed by a celebration at the hotel. She began sewing her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and silk, with pearl buttons down the back and delicate embroidery at the hem. Sarah helped with the preparations, her face glowing with happiness for her friend. The two women worked side by side in the shop, talking and laughing, planning every detail of the wedding and the life Rebecca would have afterward. The town was delighted by the news of the engagement. Colt had become something of a local hero after rescuing Sarah and recovering the money, and people were glad to see him finding happiness. Even those who had once avoided him now greeted him warmly on the street, but Colt remained vigilant. The Culver brothers had not been seen or heard from since the robbery, but that only made him more concerned. Men like that did not forget, did not forgive. They were out there somewhere, planning and waiting. His concerns proved valid in late July, just 2 weeks before the wedding. Rebecca was working late one evening, putting finishing touches on her wedding dress. Sarah had already gone to bed in the back room, exhausted from a long day of helping Mrs. Patterson with preparations for the celebration. The shop was quiet except for the soft whisper of needle through fabric and the crackle of the fire in the stove. A sound outside made Rebecca look up. Through the front window, she saw a figure moving in the shadows across the street. Her heart began to pound. It was nearly midnight. No one should be out at this hour. She set down her sewing and moved quietly to the lamp, turning it down until the shop was mostly dark. Then she retrieved the revolver Colt had given her from the drawer where she kept it, checking to make sure it was loaded as he had taught her. Another sound, closer this time, the creak of a floorboard on the porch. Rebecca's mouth went dry. She moved to the side of the window, pressing herself against the wall, gun held ready. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Rebecca's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to protect Sarah, had to protect the shop, had to hold out until help could arrive. The door burst open with a crash that made Rebecca jump. 3 men rushed in, and even in the dim light, she recognized the cold eyes of Luke Culver. "Well, well," Luke said, his voice oily and cruel. "If it isn't the little shopkeeper, where's the cowboy's woman?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. She kept the gun hidden behind her skirt. "Don't play stupid," Luke snarled. "Sarah Mitchell. Morgan took her from us, and we want her back." "She's not here," Rebecca lied. "Then I guess we'll just have to wait until she comes back." Another man, clearly one of Luke's brothers, said with a nasty laugh, "And maybe have some fun with you while we wait." He took a step toward Rebecca, and she brought up the gun, pointing it directly at his chest. "Don't come any closer," she said, and this time her voice was hard as iron. The 3 men stopped, surprise flickering across their faces. Then Luke laughed. "You gonna shoot us, little girl? I don't think you have it in you." "Try me," Rebecca said coldly. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then from the back room, Sarah's voice rang out. "Leave her alone, Luke. It's me you want. I'm here." "No!" Rebecca shouted, but it was too late. Sarah emerged from the back room, her face pale but determined. She held nothing in her hands, offered no resistance. "There's my girl," Luke said, his smile cruel. "We've missed you, Sarah. Things just haven't been the same without you." "I'll go with you," Sarah said quietly. "Just leave Rebecca alone. She has nothing to do with this." "Oh, but she does," Luke replied. "She's Morgan's woman, ain't she? I saw him kissing her at that celebration, which means she's leverage. We'll take you both. Morgan will come for you, and when he does, we'll be waiting." Rebecca's mind raced. She could shoot Luke, but his brothers would be on her before she could reload. If she let them take Sarah, the young woman would suffer unimaginably, but if she resisted, they might hurt or kill them both right here. Before she could decide, the situation changed. A gunshot rang out from the street, and one of Luke's brothers cried out, clutching his shoulder. The window shattered inward, glass spraying across the floor. "Get away from them!" Colt's voice roared from outside. Luke cursed and grabbed Sarah, using her as a shield. His remaining uninjured brother drew his own gun and returned fire toward the street. Rebecca dove behind the counter, her heart in her throat. The shop erupted into chaos. Bullets flew, wood splintered, and through it all, Rebecca could hear Colt's voice, steady and commanding, directing the fight. She realized he was not alone. Other men's voices joined his, likely Tom and some of the other townsmen. Luke dragged Sarah toward the back door, trying to escape. Rebecca did not think, just acted. She rose from behind the counter and fired, not at Luke, but at the floor in front of him. The bullet struck the boards, sending splinters flying. Luke stumbled, releasing Sarah for just a moment. It was enough. Sarah twisted away and ran toward Rebecca. Luke raised his gun to shoot her in the back, and Rebecca did not hesitate. She aimed and fired, hitting Luke in the arm. He howled in pain and rage. The front door burst open and Colt charged in, gun drawn, his face a mask of fury and fear. He took in the scene in an instant, Luke bleeding and cursing, his one brother collapsed by the window, the other surrendering with his hands up. Rebecca and Sarah huddled together behind the counter, both unharmed. The relief that flooded Colt's face made Rebecca's chest ache. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Thank God," he whispered against her hair. "Thank God you're safe." "How did you know?" Rebecca asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "I've had men watching the shop every night," Colt said. "I knew the Culvers would come eventually. Tom saw them sneaking into town and came to get me. We got here as fast as we could." Sheriff Dawson, who had returned from Bozeman just the day before, entered the shop with several deputies. They quickly took the Culver brothers into custody. Luke was raging, promising revenge even as they dragged him away. "He'll hang for the murders he's committed," Sheriff Dawson said grimly. "All 3 of them will. This is the end of the Culver gang." As the excitement died down and the shop slowly emptied of people, Rebecca found herself sitting on the settee with Sarah, both of them shaking with delayed shock. Colt knelt in front of them, checking them over for injuries with gentle hands. "You shot him," he said to Rebecca, his voice filled with pride and concern. "You actually shot Luke Culver." "I had to," Rebecca replied. "He was going to hurt Sarah." "You were incredibly brave," Colt said, cupping her face in his hands. "Both of you. But please, don't ever scare me like that again. When Tom told me the Culvers were here, that you were in danger, I thought my heart would stop." "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize," Colt said firmly. "You did everything right. You protected yourself and Sarah. I'm so proud of you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, not caring that Sarah was sitting right there. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't lose you," he said. "Rebecca, you're my whole world now. If something happened to you, I don't think I could survive it." "You won't lose me," Rebecca promised. "We're going to have a long, happy life together, Colt. I'm sure of it." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of final preparations. The Culver brothers were tried quickly, found guilty, and sentenced to hang. The trial was a sensation, drawing people from surrounding towns to watch justice being served. On the day of the hanging, Rebecca stayed in her shop, unwilling to witness the grim spectacle, but she felt safer knowing those men could never hurt anyone again. Her wedding dress was finished, beautiful beyond her wildest dreams. Sarah had embroidered tiny flowers along the hem and sleeves, each stitch a work of art. When Rebecca tried it on the night before the wedding, Sarah cried. "You look like an angel," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Colt is the luckiest man alive." "I'm pretty lucky myself," Rebecca replied, smiling at her reflection. She hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was the grieving daughter who had fled Philadelphia 8 months ago. In her place stood a woman in love, a woman who had found her place in the world, a woman ready to start a new chapter. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect Montana summer day. Rebecca dressed carefully with Sarah's help, pinning her hair up in an elegant style and adding a simple veil of lace. She carried wildflowers from Colt's special meadow, their colors vivid against the white of her dress. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town. It was packed with well-wishers, the entire population of Silver Creek seemingly determined to witness the union. Rebecca walked down the aisle alone, having no male relative to give her away, and she held her head high, proud and unafraid. Colt waited for her at the altar, and the look on his face when he saw her made Rebecca's eyes sting with happy tears. He was devastatingly handsome in a dark suit, his gray eyes shining with love and wonder. The minister performed a simple but beautiful service. When it came time for vows, Colt took Rebecca's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Rebecca, you saved my life. Not physically, but in every way that matters. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. You showed me that the past doesn't have to define the future, and that love is worth any risk. I promise to honor you, protect you, and cherish you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to be worthy of the gift you've given me by loving me. You are my heart, my home, and my hope." Rebecca could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to say her own vows. "Colt, from the moment I met you, I knew you were special. Your strength, your courage, your capacity for love, despite all the pain you've endured. You rode through a storm to save someone who needed you, and in doing so, you saved me too. You gave me purpose and passion, a reason to believe in happy endings. I promise to stand by you always, through whatever storms may come. I promise to love you with everything I am. For as long as I live, you are my partner, my love, and my future." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Colt kissed her with a tenderness that made Rebecca's knees weak. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and Rebecca felt joy so intense it was almost painful. The celebration at the hotel lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing, and everywhere Rebecca looked, she saw smiling faces. Sarah danced with Tom Bradley, the two of them laughing together, and Rebecca made a mental note to do a little matchmaking once she and Colt were settled. Those two would be good for each other. As the evening wound down, Colt swept Rebecca up into his arms, causing her to shriek with laughter. "What are you doing?" she demanded, though she was smiling. "Carrying my bride home," Colt said, grinning. "It's tradition." He carried her out of the hotel to more cheers and applause and helped her onto his horse. They rode together through the quiet streets of Silver Creek, heading out toward Colt's ranch, which was now Rebecca's home too. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached. Colt had spent the past week preparing for Rebecca's arrival, cleaning every corner and adding touches he thought she would like. Fresh curtains, a new rug, wildflowers and vases on the tables. He dismounted and reached up for Rebecca, lifting her down. But instead of setting her on her feet, he kept her in his arms and carried her to the door. "The warmest room in the house is the bedroom," he said softly, his eyes dark with desire and love. "I put extra wood in the stove, made sure everything was perfect for you." Rebecca's heart raced as Colt carried her inside and up the stairs. The bedroom was indeed warm, almost hot, and lit with dozens of candles that cast a golden glow over everything. The bed was made with fresh linens, and more wildflowers sat on the nightstand. Colt set Rebecca down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you happy?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happier than I've ever been," Rebecca assured him. She reached up and began unbuttoning his vest, her fingers only shaking a little. "Take me to bed, husband. Show me how much you love me." Colt's breath caught. He helped her remove the beautiful wedding dress with careful hands, hanging it reverently over a chair. Then he undressed himself while Rebecca watched, her eyes taking in every inch of his strong body, the scars that marked his skin, telling stories of battles fought and survived. When they came together in that warm room, it was with a mixture of passion and tenderness that took Rebecca's breath away. Colt made love to her like she was precious and fragile, yet also strong and capable, and Rebecca responded with all the love and trust she felt. They learned each other's bodies slowly, savoring every touch, every kiss, every whispered word of love. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the sheets, the candles burning low, and talked late into the night. They made more plans for their future, dreamed bigger dreams now that they were together. "I want to fill this house with children," Colt said, his hand resting possessively on Rebecca's bare stomach. "I want to hear laughter in these halls, see little ones running through the fields." "So do I," Rebecca agreed. "But let's enjoy just being us for a while first. We have time." "All the time in the world," Colt murmured, pulling her close. The first year of their marriage was blissful. Rebecca divided her time between the ranch and her shop in town, with Sarah often accompanying her to help with the business. Colt's ranch prospered, and he hired more hands, becoming one of the more successful ranchers in the territory. Sarah, as Rebecca had hoped, began spending more time with Tom Bradley. The blacksmith's apprentice had become a full partner in the smithy, and he courted Sarah with a gentle persistence that gradually won her over. Rebecca and Colt watched their romance blossom with happiness, glad to see Sarah finding joy after so much pain. In the spring of 1884, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Colt one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, picked her up, and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing, then set her down and immediately started fussing, worried he had hurt the baby. "Colt, I'm fine," Rebecca assured him, still laughing. "The baby is fine. We're both fine." "We're having a baby," Colt said, wonder in his voice. "Rebecca, we're going to be parents." "We are," she confirmed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Colt said, pulling her close. "I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. Rebecca, you've given me everything I never knew I needed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rebecca continued working at the shop for several months, only stopping when she became too large to comfortably sit at her sewing machine. Sarah took over most of the business, proving to be a capable manager, and Rebecca spent her days at the ranch, preparing for the baby's arrival. Colt was wonderfully attentive, almost comically so. He worried constantly, forbidding Rebecca from lifting anything heavier than a teacup, following her around to make sure she did not overexert herself. Rebecca found it both touching and slightly exasperating, but she loved him for his concern. In early November, as the first snows began to fall, Rebecca went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that lasted nearly 20 hours. Colt wore a path in the floor downstairs, pacing and worrying, while Dr. Miller and Sarah attended Rebecca upstairs. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry split the air. Colt nearly fell over himself rushing up the stairs, bursting into the bedroom with his heart in his throat. Rebecca lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at Colt with tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Colt approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby. He was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and the same gray eyes as his father. Colt felt something shift in his chest, a love so powerful and overwhelming that it brought him to his knees beside the bed. "A son," he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. Tiny fingers wrapped around his much larger one, and Colt felt tears slide down his cheeks. "We have a son." "We do," Rebecca said, smiling through her own tears. "I thought we could name him Thomas, after your brother, if you want." Colt's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Rebecca, are you sure? I don't want to make you sad." "I'm not sad," Rebecca said gently. "Your brother was an important part of your life, Colt. I want to honor his memory, and I think this Thomas will bring only joy." Colt nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He leaned in and kissed his wife, then his son, marveling at how much his life had changed in less than 2 years. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered to the baby. "Welcome to the world, little man. You have the best mother anyone could ask for, and I promise I'll do everything I can to be the father you deserve." Baby Thomas yawned, unimpressed by his father's promises, and Rebecca laughed softly. "He's going to keep us on our toes," she predicted. "I can't wait," Colt replied, meaning every word. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a lively, curious little boy, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's sweet smile. He was everywhere at once, getting into everything, keeping both his parents constantly busy. When Thomas was 2, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Rebecca's mother. She was a quieter child than her brother, more contemplative, with dark hair and eyes that shifted between gray and blue depending on the light. Sarah and Tom married in the summer of 1886, in a ceremony that was almost as joyous as Colt and Rebecca's had been. They built a house in town near the smithy, and the following year, Sarah gave birth to twin girls who were absolutely identical and utterly mischievous. Rebecca's shop continued to thrive, now run primarily by a young woman Rebecca had trained. Rebecca still did custom work from the ranch, creating special pieces for important occasions, but most of her time was devoted to her growing family and the ranch. Colt had become a respected member of the community, no longer the isolated hermit, but a family man and successful rancher. He still had his dark moments, times when the memories of his brother and those 12 lost soldiers weighed heavily on him. But Rebecca was always there to pull him back to the light, to remind him of all the good he had done and continued to do. In 1888, their third child arrived, another son they named William, after Sarah's father. He was a robust, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him. The ranch had expanded significantly by then. Colt employed over a dozen men and owned nearly 1,000 head of cattle. He had also begun breeding horses, developing a reputation for producing strong, intelligent animals perfectly suited to Montana's harsh climate. Life was good, better than either Rebecca or Colt had ever imagined it could be. They had their health, their children, their friends, and most importantly, each other. The love that had bloomed between them that night at the hotel celebration had only grown stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. On a warm evening in June of 1889, 6 years almost to the day after the bank robbery that had first brought them together, Rebecca and Colt sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside with Sarah, who had brought her twins for a visit, their laughter and shouts drifting through the open windows. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rebecca asked, resting her head on Colt's shoulder. "The day you rode into town with Sarah?" "All the time," Colt admitted. "It was the day my life truly began, the day I stopped just existing and started living again." "I was so angry at you at first," Rebecca said, smiling at the memory. "So frustrated that you wouldn't help. I thought you were the most stubborn man I had ever met." "I was," Colt agreed. "I was determined to push the world away, to punish myself forever for my mistakes. And then you marched onto my property and demanded I be better. You wouldn't take no for an answer." "I saw something in you," Rebecca said. "Even then, when you were at your most closed off, I saw the good man underneath. The man who would ride through a storm to save someone who needed him. The man who would carry a broken, frightened woman into the warmest room he had and make sure she was cared for." "You gave me a reason to be that man again," Colt said, turning to kiss her forehead. "You and Sarah and this life we've built. I wake up every morning grateful, Rebecca. Grateful for you, for our children, for the second chance I didn't think I deserved. We both got second chances, Rebecca pointed out. I was lost too, remember? Grieving and alone, not sure where I belonged. We found each other at exactly the right time. Fate, Colt murmured. Love, Rebecca corrected. The best kind of love, the kind that heals and transforms and makes everything possible. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The land spread out before them, vast and beautiful, full of promise. Tell me about the meadow, Rebecca said suddenly. Our meadow. Is it in bloom? More beautiful than ever, Colt replied. We should take the children there next week. Let them run through the flowers. I'd like that, Rebecca said. Thomas would love it, and Elizabeth is old enough now to appreciate it. And William would probably eat the flowers, Colt added with a laugh. Probably, Rebecca agreed, laughing too. Inside, Sarah called out that it was time to put the children to bed. Rebecca and Colt rose and went inside, moving through the familiar routines of family life. They tucked Thomas in, read Elizabeth a story, rocked William until he fell asleep. They said goodnight to Sarah and the twins, watched as Tom came to collect his family and drive them home. Finally, alone in their warm bedroom, Rebecca and Colt prepared for sleep. As they lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Rebecca thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The robbery that could have been a tragedy, the storm Colt had ridden through to bring Sarah home, the warmth and safety he had provided not just to Sarah, but ultimately to Rebecca herself. Everything had led to this, to a life filled with love and purpose, to children sleeping safely in their beds, to a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. I love you, Rebecca whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Colt replied, his arms tightening around her. Always and forever. And in the years that followed, they proved those words true. Through harsh winters and bountiful summers, through the challenges of raising children and building a legacy, through moments of joy and moments of sorrow, they stood together. Their love, born in a storm and nurtured in warmth, remained the foundation of everything they built. Thomas grew up to be a skilled horseman and took over much of the ranch operations as he got older. Elizabeth developed her mother's talent for sewing and design, eventually opening her own shop in Bozeman. William surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, using his gentle nature to educate the children of Silver Creek and surrounding areas. More children followed, twin girls in 1891 who were as wild and spirited as the Montana landscape itself, and a final son in 1894 who had his mother's dark hair and his father's quiet strength. Sarah and Tom's family grew too, eventually including 5 children who were as close to Rebecca and Colt's children as siblings. The two families remained intertwined, their friendship a constant source of joy and support. As the years turned into decades, as the 20th century arrived and the world began to change, Rebecca and Colt grew old together. Their hair turned gray, their bodies slowed, but their love never diminished. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought no one was watching, still looked at each other with the same wonder and devotion they had felt as newlyweds. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Colt took Rebecca back to the meadow where he had proposed. It was summer again, and the wildflowers bloomed in profusion, just as they had all those years ago. They stood together in the center of that riot of color, no longer young, but still deeply in love. "Do you have any regrets?" Colt asked, taking both her hands in his. Rebecca looked up at him, at the face she had loved for 3 decades, and smiled. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "You rode through a storm to save someone who needed you, and in doing so, you saved me too. You carried me into your warmest room, into your heart, and you've kept me there ever since. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "I'm the one who was saved," Colt insisted. "You gave me back my life, Rebecca. You gave me everything." "Then we saved each other," Rebecca said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "And we'll keep saving each other, every single day, for as long as we both shall live." It was a promise they kept. When Colt passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1918, at the age of 63, Rebecca was holding his hand. She grieved deeply, missing him with an ache that never fully went away. But she did not regret a single moment of their time together. They had lived fully and loved completely, and that was more than many people could say. Rebecca lived another 7 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the Wild West and the cowboy who had captured her heart. She spoke of the bank robbery and the storm, of Sarah and the Culver brothers, of a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole and beautiful. When she died in 1925, at the age of 65, her children laid her to rest beside Colt on a hill overlooking their ranch. The view stretched for miles, encompassing the land they had built together and the mountains they had both loved. And not far away, just a short ride through the foothills, was the meadow where it had all begun, where Colt had first told Rebecca he loved her, where wildflowers bloomed eternal as a testament to hope and second chances and the transformative power of love. Their story became legend in Silver Creek and the surrounding territory. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children, keeping alive the memory of the cowboy who rode through a storm and the woman who taught him how to love again. It was a story of courage and redemption, of fate and choice, of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something lasting and true. Years later, when developers wanted to build on the land that included the wildflower meadow, it was Colt and Rebecca's great-grandchildren who fought to preserve it. They succeeded, turning it into a protected space where families could come and experience the same beauty that had once saved a broken man and inspired a great love. A simple plaque was erected at the edge of the meadow, bearing words that summed up the legacy of Colt and Rebecca Morgan. Here in this place, love bloomed eternal. Here a man found hope and a woman found home. May all who visit remember that it is never too late for second chances, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, the story ended not with sadness, but with celebration, with the knowledge that Colt and Rebecca's love had rippled outward, touching not just their own lives, but the lives of generations to come. They had taken the pain of their pasts and transformed it into something beautiful. They had ridden through storms, both literal and metaphorical, and come out stronger on the other side. The cowboy who once thought he was too broken to love had found a woman who saw his worth. The woman who had lost her way had found a man who helped her discover her strength. Together, they had built a life of meaning and purpose, filled with family and friendship, hard work, and deep joy. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, a time when the land was hard, but the people were harder, when survival took courage and love took even more. Colt and Rebecca had possessed both in abundance, and they had used those qualities to build something that lasted long after they were gone. In the end, their story was simple. He rode through the storm just to bring her home. The cowboy carried her into his warmest room, and there, in that warmth and safety, they both found what they had been searching for all along. Not just shelter from the cold, not just protection from danger, but something far more precious and enduring. They found love, they found family, they found themselves, and they lived truly and fully, happily ever after.